Set you up for some nice easy PRs in the near future, and hopefully it helps you develop a backside that sets you up for the supporting role in the next Shrek reboot. Thank you to Barbell Apparel for sponsoring this channel. Don't forget to check out the Bromley t-shirts available at barbellapparel.com. Link is in the description. Guys, I'm about to commit heresy here. I'm about to go to bat for an exercise variation that has long been shunned by the strength training community. This is what we would call a cheater's lift, a faker's lift, if you will. It is one that people tend to do because it allows them to do more reps with more weight and present an air of strength and capability that they just haven't earned yet. I am, of course, talking about touch and go deadlifts. The old wisdom has always been that because deadlifts start from a dead stop, and that will be the limiting factor in every contest that you ever do, that you should make that not an issue by spending all of your work now doing every single rep from a dead stop. When you do a lot of reps, you stop in between, you reset, and what that's going to do is condition a strong, aggressive start, and you just don't got to think about it. You can just blank out and you can just pull and your body's going to know what to do. Now, this is in line with a very old school mentality, which is that the key to long-term success is just to generally make things harder. And it's not entirely wrong. I've gotten advice from old timers that ranged from wearing work boots when you deadlift so that when you go back to the floor it feels easier, to not wearing a belt when you deadlift, to this advice of not doing any touch and go reps, doing everything from a dead stop. But it's been a couple of weeks since I've had a small hill to die on, so here we go. Now, thinking about the big three or big 4 or 5, if you're the person that starts tacking on overhead presses and rows and your favorite ab exercises or whatever, the squat, bench, and deadlift work so well and they're repeated so well because they hit pretty much the entire musculature of your body between the three of them over 3 pretty distinct and easy to train movement patterns. Now, we like to take things that are complex and make them not complex. We like to observe abstract patterns and use sometimes really superficial shit to connect things and put them into boxes so we can categorize them and label them to make it easier on our 8 brains. And this is no different. We treat the big 3, even though the movements are very different, as being very similar. In fact, a lot of programs program them the same, and I've done this as well. The volume considerations, the rate of progressions, the average intensity will be the same over a squat, bench, deadlift, and most of the other lifts that pop up, and that exists in some of the most popular training programs. Now, for most people, that's going to be fine because it's the progress, it's the rate of progression and the sustainability that causes you to grow rather than a magic arrangement of sets and reps. But if an individual is trying to optimize their training, eventually they're going to turn the dials a little bit differently for something like a bench versus a deadlift. Now, when you start doing that, you have to take into account what makes them different. Well, the 3 lifts are actually very different in pretty substantial ways. Even if we go by the powerlifting gold standards, you're pausing on a bench press after taking it out of the rack and going through an eccentric. Now, even though you go through the eccentric, even though you control it, and even though you have a nice hard 2 count on that pause, you still get a little bit of that cheater energy because the kinetic energy stores for a couple of seconds. Now, with a squat, for some reason, they don't care and they let you bounce the piss out of it. And some people are really good at that. That's a skill that you can learn. Now, the deadlift is a bit of an odd duck because there is no eccentric you go through first. You're not loading into the bottom position before reflecting that stored kinetic energy. You start from the bottom. You start with no momentum, no advantaged position. You have to wedge yourself in, get tight as possible, and exert a lot more effort at the start to get that bar moving. And that's one of the reasons that the recommendation exists: do all your work from a dead stop. Now, I started thinking about this for a few different reasons. One, this channel talks a lot about the difference between developmental work that makes you bigger, widens your base out, and increases your potential for strength. And it often includes doing a lot of shit that none of you like doing whatsoever. To get my deadlift where I want it, I have to add mass. I have to widen my base in some areas. So I think a lot about developmental work and how most of the deadlift training that goes on might not check that box so well. I also started thinking about this when a Patreon member asked me about the advice he got regarding his bench press. Some rando at the gym informed this young lifter that the real key to getting an impressive bench press is to pause all of your bench reps. I didn't even have to think. I didn't stutter. I didn't have to go check my notes or research. I was like, no, that's stupid. Benching requires a lot of developmental work. You need a lot of mass around the shoulders, chest, back, and arms. And the reps and volume you're going to do are going to be broadly best suited with a touch and go style approach. That's self-evident. Now that's obviously different from getting ready for a meet or a big 1-rep max test where you do have to incorporate pause work, and as the reps drop, you might do that more and more for that neurologically specific adaptation. But for developmental stuff, no, touch and go, cycle through. Now this coincidentally came off the back of a 6-week experiment I ran where I used bottom-up squats and benches as my main lift. The timing of this was pretty startling, but everything I experienced in that 6-week time validated everything I had thought up to that point. See, I've been a big proponent of things like pin presses as a very viable way of getting really, really strong at the start of your bench press and hitting your nervous system in a way that many of you probably aren't used to. I think it's a really valuable accessory exercise, especially in a heavier peak style phase. But when I started to incorporate these movements, I noticed that I got those neurological changes very, very, very fast, but it didn't do anything for the other qualities that I generally rely on to move my squat up. So in that time, I didn't notice any appreciable muscle growth. In that time, I didn't notice my capacity increase that well. I didn't notice that my ability to cycle through full range reps, especially for repetitions, really get any better. Now, of course, we're talking about short-term adaptations. Over a long term, maybe that increases, but that's a long way to go around. When you put a block together, you want to know what's going to get better in the next 4, 5, 6 weeks. So most exercises that double as a test of strength and a really good developmental tool that's going to get you bigger and stronger utilize some form of stretch reflex, the cheater's bounce, that you go through the eccentric and you can reflect that energy back up. And what that does is it makes a very efficient rep. It makes for a very efficient way to cycle through reps. So there's going to be a trade-off. However much you think the momentum or the cheating aspect of the movement is taking away by making it easier, you're actually gaining so much on the other end because you are able to handle more weight for more repetitions in a more efficient manner. And those reps get stacked together very, very closely. You're not taking breaks in between. You're not allowing that shot of recovery because you're giving a couple seconds for the waste product to get flushed out. So there are a lot of stressors that go up at the cost of that one thing being made a little bit easier. And that's why it's so valuable. And that's the primary reason that everybody's inclined to do their bench presses touch and go. I actually heard back from that Patreon member, and he said he hit a set of 10 with 2 in the tank at 17% a heavier weight than what he had hit for an absolute maximal set of 9. So that's the trade-off. Mathematically, that equates to more work, and the work is done much faster, which creates a bigger training stress. So that's the rationale. Guys, if I can help fund this channel and help you solve a problem, I call that a win-win. So please allow me one moment to preach the good word of Boostcamp. I tend to get a little complex when I'm writing workout plans. Tracking progress for these programs is hugely important, but options were never great. I would write these long, complex progressions by hand into a notebook, or I would carry a binder filled with spreadsheets I printed off of LiftVault. That's why I'm here to introduce you to Boostcamp. Boostcamp is the easy way to track training progress directly from your phone. Their library of programs features countless dozens of powerlifting and hypertrophy specific programs from your favorite creators, including Jeffrey Verity Schofield, Johnny Candido, Eric Helms, Greg Nuckols, Alberto Nunez, and of course, yours truly. Boostcamp also has exclusive programs that you just won't find anywhere else. Select the one best suited to your needs and watch the sets, reps, weights, and exercises populate automatically. Don't guess at that one weight you lifted that one time for how many reps again? Have your log of training with you at all times for easy reference in the convenience of your phone. Not only does Boostcamp have a stellar product, but their support is the only reason this channel exists. So thank you, the viewer, and thank you to Boostcamp. Check it out today. The link is in the description. Now, working from the bottom, it is great for starting strength. It's that big neurological hit. You have to practice wedging in, getting tight, being really efficient. And your limiting factor is your ability to recruit motor units, to recruit a lot of them, and to recruit them in a very short period of time. So that is the primary adaptation you're going to see. But the cost, it limits your ability to load the top end. You are already limited in these movements by the weakest link, which tends to be the bottom portion of the movement. Remember the strength curve. You're always going to be stronger mechanically at the top of the lift. So if you're further limiting your ability to expose that part of the movement to load, you're going to be missing out. It can potentially fatigue you much faster, especially with something like a deadlift, where you need that huge surge of strength and power to get that weight moving for each rep. So again, the bottom end is just taking all of the resources and gassing you out, and that's less effort that can be put towards the rest of the movement. It kills your speed. Now that might be a good thing, teaching you to hit the gas the whole way through, but again, very inefficient to cycle through a lot of reps and a lot of volume. And then these last two were particular to me from running through my 6-week experiment. The fact that there is no eccentric means that developmentally it's not going to be as good. There's not as much total tension on the working muscles for as long. So growth-wise, it's not as good as something that is going to feature a controlled lowering phase that is going to keep you under tension a bit longer. And also, it's really damn hard on the joints. I noticed extreme tendon inflammation about 4 weeks in. I was getting stronger. I was breaking off the bottom much, much better. But damn, were my pec insertions achy. My hips were starting to feel it from the bottom. And it got me thinking, how would I have to train if I absolutely had to do a bottom-up version? If this is what a bench press contest was, if this is what a squat contest was crawling under like Bud Jeffries and going from the bottom, I would have to implement a whole bunch of wizardry to be able to grow at the same rate. I would not be able to lean on these movements the exact same whatsoever. So I said all that to say this. If you are looking for some developmental juice in your deadlift regimen, if you think you could stand to have some more meat on your hips, on your upper back, on your hammies, if you feel like they're not getting taxed heavy enough, the little bullshit single leg hamstring curls you're doing at the end just really isn't getting the hammies to grow, and that hip extension is lagging as a result, you can modify these movements to be able to do exactly that in a way that's still going to be specific to the lift you're trying to get really, really good at. So here's what to expect from touch and go deadlifts. If you've never done them before, if you want to give them a shot, this is what to expect. First of all, it's a different sensation. When you come down, you tap and you come back up. The way that the muscles tighten up in anticipation of that change of direction over the first few inches of movement is different. You'll feel them grabbing in a little bit of a different way. When I go from a dead stop, the position I'm in to wedge in and get tight for that first break, it's a little different than the position I'm in to try and exploit the stretch reflex. So you'll probably feel a little bit different action in the hammies, a little bit different action in the glutes, and you might find yourself with a little more play in the joints as far as like how bent over or upright you are. Because again, starting the movement doesn't hinge on this like perfect position to be as efficient as possible in order to not gas yourself out on that first hit. So it is going to feel a bit different. Secondly, the hams and glutes are going to cook. If you do anything beyond like 4 or 5 reps and you do it in this style, tapping each one from the ground, not resting in between reps, you're going to notice fatigue accumulate so much faster. You'll probably notice a bit in the upper back as well, but the hams and glutes, the main mover, they're going to be running through this really aggressive, really fast stretch shortening cycle in a way that they're not used to with this movement. And the end result is going to be you being sore. You're going to feel blood pooling. You're going to feel those metabolites building up. So the stress that you're going to feel is going to be a very good sign that this is going to do exactly what you want it to do. You're going to notice that you want to rush the descent because you can get a lot out of rushing the bar down to the bottom and slamming into the ground. Now, the bar doesn't actually bounce off the ground. If you drop a loaded barbell on the ground, it might bounce like a fraction of an inch. It is, again, the stretch reflex, it is moving aggressively into that descent. And the faster you go into it, the more energy you store up in reflex. So it's just like when you drop down really fast. Remember, the goal is not to arbitrarily just run through a bunch of reps so you can write those tallies in your book and show everybody what a good special lifter you are. Your goal is to accrue good, meaningful, productive developmental stress. So control the descent. The tap, I recommend just hitting a tap. Try not to let all of the weight sink into the ground. Maintain a bit of tension. You'll still be able to increase your overall performance with repetition, but you're going to have the added benefit of the eccentric, which is thought to contribute more to muscle growth. It certainly contributes more to soreness. And that extra time, tempo control is going to lend itself to a more well-rounded package. You're also going to notice that you want to coast through your lockout. If you're doing 10 or 12 reps, you're going to get that bit of momentum, and you're going to want to put out the bare minimum as you get to lockout. This is like jogging as opposed to sprinting. Now, you don't need full-on compensatory acceleration where you're charging through the lockout as hard as you can, but you do want to practice aggressive, forceful lockouts. This is a great opportunity to use a more advantaged start to help your lockout. So if your lockout sucks, this is how you practice getting that bar to your knees and then cranking your hips through as fast as possible. And that's going to use your glutes more effectively. It's going to develop your glutes more. It's going to develop your lockout more by shoving the hips through. You can almost look at a touch and go as an elevated style deadlift because you're making that first couple of inches of start a bit more easy. So you can take that effort and put it into your lockout, and it works just fantastically well. Now you're also going to notice, you want to watch out for this, you're going to notice that eventually you're going to be so efficient at this, you're going to creep towards touch and go artist territory. These are the people that can just do these insane performances if they're allowed to touch and go, but the second they have to pause or do something from a dead stop, they fall apart. I am a good example of that. Now, over so many years, I never touch and goed. When I finally did, I was able to do my 1 rep max for a set of 5. Now, part of that is because for strongman, I put so much of the effort into my lockout that by making the starting position just a little bit easier, I was really able to game the system and punch my hips through. So I came from all of that training into touch and go, being able to do it very, very well because my top end was so strong. That's not necessarily going to apply to all of you, but as you adapt to touch and go, you can exploit it further and further and further. So imagine, for instance, if I practiced it, if I got good at it, maybe that set of 5 is like a set of 8. Imagine doing your 1 rep max from the floor for a set of 8. Now, this is the thing that we're going for, that added developmental value, but don't mistake that for the same. Don't think you can punch in your 10 rep max on a touch and go deadlift and put it into a 1 rep max calculator and figure out what you're capable of. It's not even going to be remotely close. My touch and go performances correlated with like 850 deadlifters. Of course, there was no way I could actually move those loads. This is just important to keep in mind so you don't go plugging bullshit numbers into your workout protocol that has you starting out for sets of 5 with weight that you can't pick up off the floor one time. Here's a little advice on when to use them so you budding powerlifters don't put all your eggs in this basket in hopes of becoming the next Benny Magnuson. You want to be a little strategic about where they pop up. There's something you can use. You can even spam them and get a lot of good positive results out of them. But you have to know how to tie them in to the more specific work depending on what your end goal is. So the first group, the easiest group to talk to, is a group that doesn't give a good goddamn about getting their 1 rep max deadlift up. They either like the idea of just being able to handle a bunch of weight for a lot of work, or they like the idea of functional strength, or they like the idea of just being big as shit. If you're a physique head, if you're a guy that just wants mass, then this is perfectly fine. There's no special reason to do your deadlifts from a dead stop. In fact, plenty of good successful bodybuilders will stick to things like RDLs, or they'll do their deadlift variations out of a rack. There's nothing wrong with that for developmental purposes. Things get tricky when you do want to take this and tie it in to a 1 rep max in a powerlifting or a strongman meet. Now, if you do care about strength, which I think most of you do, you can use this as a secondary movement just about any time in your training. Even in a really heavy peak phase where you're right up against a meet, there's nothing stopping you from doing your last set as like an AMRAP done touch and go style. It's easy to do your regular dead stop work and then cut the weight 10 or 20% and then touch and go through like 10 or 15 reps. There's nothing wrong with that. That's a very viable way to keep some intensity, keep some of that density work in your training that gets you into those later thresholds, that good developmental sauce that's going to keep you growing throughout the entire cycle. Now, you can lean on it more when you're further away from a test. So if you're in a dedicated base or hypertrophy phase where you're just trying to slap some meat on your bones, you can have your deadlift day be touch and go. And again, developmentally, I've said that word 19 times in the last 2 minutes, but it's also easy to recover from. That's something that they don't really tell you. One of the things that makes deadlifts so hard to recover from is the fact that you do have to wedge in and get that big hit at that first repetition. So if you can eliminate that, you're going to have an easier time recovering. And again, I noticed this when I was doing the dead stop work, when I was doing the benching and squatting from a dead stop. I found that it was a lot harder to pace recovery than if I was doing the regular kind of bounce or touch and go variations. So if you're programming your deads for like sets across, if you're doing repeating sets of 5, 6, 8 reps, doing them touch and go, it's a great way to do it. I like to do something reverse pyramid-ish. Maybe I work up to a top 5. Maybe I drop back, do some higher rep work that I normally would not be able to do with any meaningful weight if I was going dead stop. And then even working into an AMRAP. So working the way down, I do like using this for high reps. Get in the weeds. Do a set of 10, do a set of 15, see what that feels like, and see how easily you can progress that because you're not used to that threshold. It's a great opportunity to do that. As you get closer to a meet or a contest day, you're going to want to put a lot more effort on having all of your reps be from a dead stop. So as you transition into anything below 5 reps, as you get 6 or 8 weeks out from a meet, that's when you really want to start practicing breaking every single rep from a dead stop. And then touch and go stuff is going to get further and further away. You might even cycle it out. So if you are doing deficits or block pulls or paused work as your primary accessory that's supposed to help you out in that peak phase, you might want to practice doing those from a dead stop as well. So it's just about balancing the proportions. It's not do all of this or do none of this. It's how specific is it at any given time in the block that you're in, and what do those proportions have to look like to get the predictable changes that you want in that block. So give it a shot. I'm not lying when I say that acclimating to any amount of volume or rep work with this is nasty. It's hard. Many of you will be absolutely shocked by how you feel when you do it. So try this stuff out. Hopefully this sets you up for some nice easy PRs in the near future, and hopefully it helps you develop a backside that sets you up for the supporting role in the next Shrek reboot. Thank you so much for watching, guys. Don't forget to check out the Bromley shirts. We got the Bully shirt. We got the Kong shirt at barbellapparel.com. Link is in the description. Thanks again. Until next time, this is Bromley. I'll see you.